Hello and welcome to the Business Podcast at Imperial College Business School. I am your host, Amin Siala, and today we'll be talking about something that is relevant to you, me, and everyone in this world today and in the future. The main theme of our topic today is artificial intelligence. And to have this discussion, my guest today is Eduardo Aguilar. Thanks a lot for coming.
Great to be here.
Eduardo has a PhD in electrical and electronic engineering from Imperial College London, and he is currently pursuing an MBA at Imperial College Business School. He's also currently the head of technology at the Helix Center, which we'll find out about very soon. And he's had a host of various different experiences from speaking at TED events, Wired Live events, supporting in certain award ceremonies in Cancer Research UK. He's mentored a few startups, and there's so many more things that you've been up to, Eduardo, which I'm excited to talk to you about. But firstly, thanks a lot for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great.
Yeah. So I'm going to get straight into it.
Okay.
Tell people listening that have been hearing the buzzword artificial intelligence for years. What is artificial intelligence?
So artificial intelligence is essentially what feels new now, but very quickly becomes just commoditized. So if you were to think of what now feels like artificial intelligence is like winning the game of Go, or whereas in 1984 would have been beating Kasparov at chess, and anywhere in between, you could say that the Google search includes some form of AI. Now, the thing is that as soon as it becomes ordinary, then people don't consider it as AI. They just think, oh, that's just tech. And so it's a very fine, thin line of what is new and people don't really understand just yet. But then as soon as they use it every day, it's like, well, that's just normal.
Right.
So the tools needed to achieve that magical effect are different. So in the past, it might have been some, handcrafted programming, whereas now they're using deep learning and so on. The word artificial intelligence, at least the way I look at it, is it's what is perceived by the public from the outside. Inside, there are very, very different fields and means to an end. So that there are many ways to achieve the same goal.
Okay.
Some tools don't really work. Some tools work really well for certain things. But essentially, artificial intelligence is just a whole bag of tricks that can make things look like magic and sometimes work really well. But in itself is not a field of study. It's not like you would say maths or physics. It's a field of study, but it isn't one single tool, if you were to put it that way.
Okay, so I am aware that there are some university institutions that offer
Yes.
programs titled artificial intelligence.
Yes.
So are you saying then that's not specifically just artificial intelligence?
I guess one good analogy would be the business school. Business school includes accounting, includes marketing, includes many other things. And what I meant to say was that when, for example, a business in the real world needs to solve a problem, sometimes there'll be an accounting problem, sometimes there'll be a marketing problem. And so in the same way with artificial intelligence, sometimes you need to use one tool or use another. So AI as a field is an umbrella term, if you were to think about it that way.
Got it.
So it's not like one day you wake up, you pick up an AI book and that's going to help you forever, because there'll be challenges that require different sub-tools, if you think about it that way.
Right. And you're currently at the Helix Center.
Yes, that's right.
What is the Helix Center? Tell listeners about it.
The Helix Center is a collaboration between Imperial College and the Royal College of Art. And we basically are based in the St. Mary's campus, so within the hospital. And the idea of the Helix Center is to use user-centered design to solve some of the more pressing healthcare needs. And we've got work going on end of life, on drug decision support systems. So, for example, how to give a child that is in the middle of a fit during an emergency, how to make sure that you give the right dose quickly. And then many other projects that we're also undergoing right now. But essentially, the Helix Center started off as primarily a design and clinical team with some outsourced tech. And now that a lot of the projects have matured, they brought me in last year in May to come in and essentially have the in-house tech team to be able to do things a lot faster.
Right. So to do things a lot faster. Now, you've mentioned to me previously, off the record, that you are interested in the useful applications of artificial intelligence.
Yeah. The useful application of everything, really.
What does useful mean to you?
Okay. So useful would mean that it improves someone else's life in a way that is not a zero-sum game. So if for example, you have a coffee and I take it from you, I benefit, but you lose. Whereas if I was to put together something that helps us both or helps one but doesn't become a detriment to the other person, then that I see that as a benefit, as a plus. Obviously, you need to be mindful as to how you account for the cost of something, because obviously there's the environment and so on. But as a whole, things that add value rather than just shift it from one person to another.
Right, that is what is useful for you then, in the case. Because I was thinking, there are these algorithmic trading houses in America, actually, which I believe one of them managed to do 364 days of positive trading. So it made money every single day of the year except for one day. And it was using all sorts of machine learning and algorithm. How would you categorize that, given that it is the business podcast?
I would categorize that as a very interesting technological approach to basically play a system. The trading floor is something that has been evolving over the years and essentially has been getting faster and faster and faster. Some people can argue for the benefits of high-frequency trading. Some others will say that it adds a lot of risk because all of a sudden the algorithms can very quickly spiral down out of control.
But this never happened though, right?
No, there have been cases where all of a sudden the algorithms start causing problems, and they need to, put measures into place like either close or stop them or slow things down. I can't remember one off the top of my head, but it's definitely been.
There have been cases. Okay.
Yeah. And you can think very quickly of how that would be, because if you train something to say do a specific trade based on a specific observation, essentially it's like a multivariable control system. You have observables, controllables, non-observables, non-controllables. If you start trying to control your portfolio of assets by buying and selling because you want to optimize for something, that thing that you, the way you impact the market is by sending a signal, which is I want to buy or I want to sell. Other people might observe that in a way that triggers them to do something else. And what can happen is that you need a certain amount of stability.
Yep.
Right? So imagine that, for example, when people learn how to drive a car, if it's not an automatic car, you have to control the clutch and the accelerator. And there are moments where if you're going slow enough, you essentially, the wobble of the car makes your foot go on the pedal more or less. And you can see the car galloping. So that's essentially a system oscillation because of the feedback. Or the same as with microphones and speakers. There isn't really a reason why that can't happen in another system where you have information feedback loops. Now, the problem is that if you are wobbling your car, you can do two things. You can stop, or you can just put the foot on the accelerator, and then you get yourself out of that oscillating situation. If you do the same with a market, you can send the market out of control, out of balance, essentially. It does. It's a very exciting area to work in because they do very interesting things. For example, when you send a packet for a trade, you need to do it so quickly.
A packet is
so. Very good question. So imagine that some information comes in, right? And I'm sort of a computer reading information from the market, and based on that information, I think I'm going to make a buy
decision.
Okay. Now, the race to be first is so high that I will send a packet saying I want to buy while I'm still reading and processing the information. And if I change my mind at the very end, I corrupt the packet on the network. So packets have this redundancy check at the end to make sure that nothing's been corrupted, so that I have that edge over other people. And And that just opens up a whole host of really interesting topics for engineers. But
Yeah.
from a personal point of view, I find that very, very interesting, but on a geek level rather than on a practical
Yeah,
level.
I mean, I'm trying to, I guess, explore the overview, the
Yes.
bigger picture of this,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult to talk about artificial intelligence
Yes.
without delving into the ethics of it.
Of course.
And this is where I was going with the question. So, I referred to the trading house that is using artificial intelligence, machine learning, to essentially beat the market. Okay, and they're making a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
But could that technology
Yeah.
be used elsewhere to benefit mankind, to reduce poverty,
Yeah.
to, I guess, create an equal playing field to all the population? Is it being used for the right reasons? And is there a danger there? Because you mentioned that you're interested in useful applications. So my question to you is, how do we ensure that we're actually utilizing these technologies for good?
So one of the reasons why there's still a lot of imbalance in society is, and obviously it's not the only reason, but is that there are many situations where there are market failures. So essentially, a market failure is when the people that could sell or could produce something are not incentivized enough because the people that need to buy it or want to buy it don't have the means to buy it at the price that they essentially want to sell produce at. Now, you could have an example with that is like education, right? With children in schools, setting up if you want to give in terms of quantity, right? You want to give schooling to all the children in the country. You need to have a certain number of schools, and the people that want to provide school services from a private perspective will ask for a certain amount, but not everybody can provide it. So you then have externalities like the government coming in and subsidizing that. Same thing happens with healthcare and so on. But what tends to happen is that you don't have that very often, and across countries you have aid and so on, but you don't have it fixing every single thing. And so, and the same thing goes with the other way around. You have markets that you want to control, like tobacco. You put more taxes on it. The critical thing is that many of these market failures are perpetuated because the way to produce let's call it either capital cost to get started, like vaccines or antibiotics, is very, very high, and there isn't enough of a payout projected at the end. But if, on the other hand, a technology comes about that makes the production of these things a lot easier, like let's say education, right? Now, a lot of people are learning through YouTube, Vimeo, whatever, Coursera, at a very, very low price that was impossible before.
Absolutely.
And this isn't so much AI; it's just technology. And in this situation, I'm speaking of technology as the economical term of just how effectively you can do something. And what I think is very interesting is how AI can play a role in bringing down these barriers to certain markets existing, and as a result, allowing for some people to help others at a price that can meet them both and a quantity that can meet them both.
Okay, on the point of helping others,
Yes.
on your TED Talk, you showed a picture of the Syrian-Turkish border
Yes.
before the war and after the war.
Yes.
And you showed, it's quite a distressful image, really, where
Yeah.
people were fleeing war and they left their cars on the border and they ran for safety. And you are suggesting, correct me if I'm mistaken, that we can use automation / AI to fix that problem and stop war?
So there are certain things that technology can't fix, like greed or anger.
Those are human traits.
Yeah, just things that people have every now and then. But there are things that trigger distress that are very fundamental things that we need. Like, for example, food, shelter, safety. The one of the things I mentioned after is basically if you cover the fundamentals like education, food, healthcare, you essentially make it a lot less likely that people will start a conflict, right? If everything's taken care of, right? If you have no risk, if your life will be just as good without starting a fight, then what I'm suggesting is essentially to assist in providing technology to make things that are needed, not just nice to haves or desirables, just needed, the root needs, fundamental needs, will improve things. So, for example, one of the aspects that had a significant impact on the Syrian war is the drought. If there hadn't been a drought and people had enough to get by, it would have been less likely. I'm obviously, just touching on one topic. There's a lot of aspects that would have played on this, but it would essentially dampen the network effects that all these negative initiatives currently have.
Okay, so there are people out there that believe politics is the answer, right, to fixing something. Okay, some people out there believe that we should have dialogue to fix our problems and conversations and be frank and put the conversations on the table. Am I correct in assuming you're more you like to think that technology is the answer here? Just technology, good technology.
I would argue that in order to fix difficult problems, you need many different tools. A bit like what we were saying before about AI, right? Politics is definitely needed, particularly when you have value differences between religions, two nations, religions, and so on. What I was referring to earlier was me, as an engineer. What can I do to help? And whilst other people try the political route, is also what can we do to minimize distress? Because if you think about the value differences between, say, different European countries or other countries that are not do not have a high percentage of the population in either poverty or distress, the likelihood of going to war is a lot smaller.
Right. For example, Scandinavia. Yeah, they have the high quality of life.
Yeah,
and it doesn't seem likely that they're going to enter any war anytime soon.
That's right. So it's, in order to put it in from a first principles point of view, it's a lot easier to convince someone to go to war when they have nothing to lose. Now, if they have something to lose because they have a family, because they've been able to feed their family, because they've been able to have a safe life with their family, they have a lot more to lose. And so they'll say, well, hang on a minute, what is it that we're going to gain from this violent approach to solving a problem? And if they have something that, if we minimize the number of cases where people have nothing to lose, then I personally believe, from a first principle point of view, that it will reduce the odds. Put it that way. I'm not saying it will be a silver bullet.
You'll eliminate it, but
it's one of the many lead bullets, like a previous colleague of mine used to say.
So a lead bullet. I think I agree. It makes sense, and I'm pretty sure it's going to make sense to a lot of people listening. So on this point, actually, as you were speaking, I thought of the universal basic income. Yeah. Why don't you tell people what universal basic income is and give us your perspective? Okay,
so my understanding of it, and obviously very different people have different descriptions of it in terms of flavors and so on. But the universal basic income is essentially this idea that if someone, for whatever reason, cannot find a job, then they will have a certain amount of money given to them by a government or a higher entity to allow them to continue to carry out their life within a market economy, rather, so that they can continue to essentially pay their rent or buy food and so on. And I think that there are some very good thoughts behind that. I mean, for example, there's a story of how at one point Walmart had such a good model of their suppliers' negotiating power and their staffing models and so on, that they could drive the price of the things they procured as far down as they wanted, as people could continue to produce them. The problem is that people were then so strapped for cash that nobody would come to their shops. And essentially, you need to put a little bit of money in to be able to keep the market working. So this is the same sort of situation, but at a country level. So if imagine that 10 years from now,
Yep.
40% of the people doing, say, an admin role
Yep.
are now redundant and for whatever reason cannot reskill. This results in families no longer having an income, results in a lot of distress, and as a result also would as a side effect reduce the amount of money flowing in the market, right? Which then has an impact on all the other companies that were initially okay, but just because there's a lot less demand, then all of a sudden is gone. And so I think that it will definitely be one of the tools in the box to handle the transition that is most likely going to come soon of a lot of jobs disappearing.
So you are on the side that says jobs will disappear because of technology's improvement?
I'm conscious that it's likely to happen. I can't really put my finger on a number or a timeline, but what's very different about this new wave of automation that's coming up is that in the past, in order to install a loom, like a big machine for textile industry, you had to pay it. You needed capital to pay. What happens now is that you have a company that might produce some software, and in order for you to install it, it's just a click of a button. So if, for example, you have before a big, very large team of people working in finance, and they're doing, handling the expenses and doing the numbers and all that, and all of a sudden you say, oh, well, we're just going to install an expenses system that means that people can just take a picture of the receipt. Someone, if the machine doesn't detect it, someone in another country is going to review it, type in the numbers, and it's just going to be a case of accept a decline by the manager. All of a sudden, that person needs to be doing something else if they want to stay. The same thing can happen with a lot of the HR jobs, and I'm just giving these examples because most of what certain jobs do is handling information rather than making decisions. And so if you're and both of these things are aspects that can be done by software, because software is good at both piping data take it from here, manipulate it, pass it on, or take these two things, and if this rule applies, then this is the answer. Yes or no?
So you've differentiated between jobs that involve handling data
Yeah.
and jobs that require decision making.
Yes.
So jobs that handle data are more likely to go
First, yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Then the decision making jobs will follow.
Yes, I think so. I mean, depending on the job, but the decision making has a whole wide range of like a spectrum of difficulty. So imagine that you were to say, okay, can so and so take holidays a week from now? A manager will think, okay, well, so this project needs okay, the person can take holidays. That very quickly, if all the information is available, can be done automatically, and the manager just needs to say, okay, approve, because all the considerations have been put very clearly in front of this person, or can even be done in an automated way. If you then ask me, okay, what business decisions should we take longer term? That's more tricky because you need experience and a lot of context in understanding this. So another way to put it, for example, when you're programming, you'll see that certain things have state and certain things don't have state. So if you order an Uber, the likelihood of getting it within 3 minutes, it depends on the traffic, depends on which drivers are around and so on. But a lot of other things are stateless and they're deterministic. So it also means that there's the advantage that not only is it fast, but it is less likely to have human factors and human errors within it. So this is going to be very, very appealing to people who are maybe starting a business, and instead of hiring one or two people, will just say, oh, I'll just get this tool to help me.
Okay, so if you were, let's say, about to approach university today,
Yes.
what course do you think would be the most strategic in order to ensure that you're not going to be out of a job?
Well, it obviously depends on the person's interest.
Okay.
I think that obviously the computer science will be a good one. But then there's also the business side is good because the business world moves relatively fast, but not as fast as the software world, for example. I mean, what every year and a half, what you knew is what you used to know is now pretty much obsolete. I mean, the concepts and the ideas are the same, but the tools you use change very quickly. So you always need to be reskilling and reskilling and reskilling in the software world. In the business world, you have to do that, but you don't have to do it as often. So the business one will be good because it's a slow moving thing that industry that will still be needed in the future. I can't really put my finger on one not to do, but definitely. Well, this is it's funny. It's something that my mum used to tell me when I was little. She said, "Look, you can do whatever you want, but just pick something that if there's a war, people will need you." Right? And it sounds a bit extreme, and obviously the whole connotation of this was because of the Spanish Civil War, where her grandparents were basically there when it happened, and mother as well. But is the idea that it's very good to follow your passion because you're going to spend a lot of time doing it. But the problem is that you might finish a course and then realize that you have a hard time finding a job. And again, finding a job is just a means to an end. It's is either a means to an end for you to help others, but also a means to an end for you to have an income. There's no reason why, for example, you couldn't write a book yourself or start a company yourself. It's just that the skills, the knowledge, and the wisdom that people acquire during university can quite often just be book learning. So rather than say pick this course over the other, I would instead really motivate whoever is asking for advice to get as much experience in between courses as possible.
Experience in between courses.
Experience in the industry and in the real world, getting a job, like either get a job over the weekend, get a job on the evenings, get a job in the summer. Because what happens as well is that the advice that people give you, the workplace is changing really quickly. The advice that people give you, for example, if you ask your parents, will be very different because the work dynamics are different, because teams are built differently, because people communicate differently. In the past, a lot of people used to have an admin or a secretary if they were in a high-paid job. Now that doesn't even exist. Absolutely. They were expected to reply to an email at 11 p.m. So a lot of these things have changed. The rules of the game have changed. So it's good to either learn it for yourself or ask someone who's maybe about 3 years ahead of you, 3 to 10 years ahead of you, but not too far, because that person's advice will be based on the rules of the game from before.
Okay, so that point is actually something I want to focus on a little bit, which is about advice.
Yeah.
Because this is a tricky one, and I've faced this personally. Mm-hmm. I've realized after asking advice from a variety of people that ultimately everyone is just going to kind of blow their own trumpet, right? Everyone's going to, based on their experience, based on what they see, and however smart and successful they are, it is narrow in the sense that it's relatively narrow to them. Mm-hmm. If someone succeeded getting into the medicine field, they go in to recommend something similar based on their experiences. And if you go to somebody else, they go in to recommend something based on their experiences. Mm-hmm. So where is the right place to get advice?
I would say maybe find people who are more interested in finding out why you're asking for advice than people who are keen to just tell you the story. And I've experienced this myself. So you might ask someone for advice, and like you said, it's very narrow. But very often the best advice is not a statement, but a question. So if you were to ask me a question now, I'd say, okay, well, what motivated you to say that? And it's very good because it helps people unpack the difference between what's often called a means goal, so a means to an end. You're doing X so that you can do something else, or an end goal, right? So your end goal would be, I want to have enough money to not have to worry. I want to have a house that I can live in, whether you own it or not. That's up to you. Like you can decide your preference. And then you want to have a family that you can spend enough time with and everybody's healthy and be happy on a day-to-day. Now, these can be considered as end goals. And once you achieve it, you then need to work on maintaining it. But very often people define their immediate goals as if they were an end goal in itself. Like, I want to go to university and do X. Like, yeah, but you're going to university and do X and you'll get a piece of paper and you'll get some knowledge. But why are you doing that? So normally people follow a chain, and this chain of goals is the sort of recipe, step-by-step recipe that was correct maybe 10, 15 years ago. And that was correct 10, 15 years ago because the rules of the game were different. Nobody would hire you if you don't have a degree, for example. Nobody would hire you if you didn't have recommendations. So that's why a lot of people talk about go to university or like meet people when you're in university, all these things. I still agree on both, by the way, but what I'm about to say is that the rules of the game have changed in that you can learn by yourself a lot of things. You can go online, you can read, you can go on YouTube, you can learn. And so the recipe for success is now different because the rules of the game have changed.
Absolutely. I think the point about being able to learn anything online is a paramount one. So you're right. So university, say 50 years ago, might have actually been a place where you'd need to go to learn because YouTube wasn't around back then. Tutorials and guides and reviews and PDFs were not around.
Let me put this into context.
Go ahead.
That is a perfect time because that's when my dad went to university.
50 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. He did chemistry and then he did a PhD in chemistry as well, chemistry and biology. Now, when he was in school, obviously Spain was under a dictatorship and so on, but he had a geography book that had no maps in it. Okay, so imagine the city of Madrid is south of so-and-so river and east of so-and-so mountain.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
Why was that? Why?
Well, I don't really know why, but I can imagine that it was either because printing a map had either more difficulties from a printing perspective, or printing a map in the book was more expensive because of so-and-so cost, or even because there was no quality control in terms of what books were given to kids, right? My dad loves maps, by the way. It's just, but it's one of those things where now a lot of this information is available, is digested, is free, and so it's a lot easier for people to find the information required to make a decision. It's the wisdom and the judgment from previous experience of how things are going to pan out that helps. And so that's where experience is really, really helpful. Experience
in itself.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that. So I actually did some research at the start of the year, around September, October time. And I came across Ptolemy's map. So he was attributed to be one of the first people to create a world map.
Okay.
And I think it was only a certain percentage of the actual world map, but his suggestion and his work was what was used to build upon it, right? And that is science at the end of the day. It's incremental changes. As they say, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. But then what I concluded after that was, okay, so I think there was an initial stage where scientists and explorers and adventurers were trying to gather information.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to know how many continents are there in the world. Then it comes to when the printing press came, okay, the printing revolution.
Yeah.
Oh, now I not only have I gathered the information, but I can now put it in a publishable, exportable, digestible, cheap, affordable format, which people can consume in the masses.
Yeah.
Then another layer after that was it being very, very ubiquitous. Yeah. So now somebody in a village in India with an internet connection, with a very basic phone, can access the same information someone in the heart of Silicon Valley can. Yeah. So now information has become cheap and available to everybody today as we speak, more or less.
Static information.
Static.
What I mean is that information can be expressed in many ways, can be a file or a book or whatever, but you could also think of the parameters that train a software model as information too. So that can be the secret source of one company over the other. So the information required to replicate the Google search engine That's also information, but it's not available to everyone.
Right. Okay. And so you don't consider that static information?
Well, I mean, that keeps changing every time because they keep improving. But putting static aside, it's just that not all information is available.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, you're going to have to keep some sort of trade secrets.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the sort of business sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just interested in your perspective. So, what does this mean? I mean, does that mean we can learn faster? Does that mean we should be innovating in a much, much quicker speed than it used to be? What does this mean for the future?
What I've observed so far, before I go into predictions, is that in the past, the people that were held in high regard were the ones that knew a lot, because that allowed them to make quick decisions and be ahead of the rest, right? And that was good because that person didn't have to go and explore something, didn't have to go and read a book about it, didn't have to go and learn about it or ask someone else. They could, on their own, make the right decision quickly with little effort and time consumption. Now, given that information is available to, like you said, almost everyone for free, what's the next bottleneck?
Yeah.
Is the decision making. And that requires the ability to ingest the information, process the information, and then judge the areas of uncertainty too. So, for example, I'm sure you've come across people that are really uncomfortable about to make a decision if they don't have all the information. So it's some people even call it paralysis by analysis, like where you really need to know everything, otherwise you don't go for it. Some other people are very happy-go-lucky and they'll take whatever risk. But what I've found to be very useful is to say, okay, well, what's the end goal? And then you work backwards. So before you achieve X, you need to have achieved Y, and before that, then something else and a couple of other things. And very often what happens is that people will think about the second or third step without having really thought out if this direction is actually going to allow them to climb the mountain.
Right.
Whereas sometimes you need to rebase and then climb through another path. And having that ability to, now that everyone has the information, is a level playing field like you were referring to before, it's about having the training and thought process that is effective and efficient, so that you don't have to like trawl thousands and thousands of records before you decide
on a decision. So on that point, trawling thousands and thousands of records, does that mean then that data analytics and big data, again, another buzzword, but again, this is a hot topic, as always, not many people understand it. Is this where it becomes relevant, sort of just to continue our conversation? So companies now are producing so much data, vast amounts of data. And they're at a point where they can't hire enough data engineers, data analysts, because they're trying to bring these computer scientists in the room and telling them, please interpret this data for us. How can we use it to improve our service? For example, Uber. Think of how much data Uber is generating on a daily basis. And then, what could it do with that data? To improve how we get around the city of London, for example. But then imagine that. Imagine how many cities there are in around the world. Like, surely that is they can change the world.
Yes. So data can be very useful for two things. One is tactical decisions. So what do we do today as opposed to what we did yesterday, as well as strategic decisions. So where should we invest more to be in a better position in the future? Now, for tactical decisions, a lot of these business analytics and data analytics tools can be very, very practical from a dashboarding point of view in an ops-based company, or in sales, or in accounting, or whatever. But like you said, what I think is very, very, very useful is to be able to look at this to solve harder problems where previously data was a bottleneck. So let's put it this way. Very often when forecasting, people just put the finger in the air and say, okay, well, I think this is a conservative estimate and I'm happy to go with the risk because we need to decide today. Now, more data is available to be able to decide still today, but with a narrower level of uncertainty. But it's important to not be extremely bogged down, because what happens often is that people look at the data without any questions to answer. So if you basically start swimming in data and you don't know what you're really looking for, it's almost like going into one of these colorful swimming pools with bowls. You know, the ones where kids go.
Yeah.
And you're thrown in there, but you're not told what you're looking for.
Right.
So you come back and it's like, oh, I've got a yellow one. Is that what you're looking for? No, I've got a red one. And then you basically spend a lot of time. Whereas if someone says, I want a red one, please, you don't even need to get in. You just grab it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to go and look into data with questions in mind and with a reason why that's relevant.
That's very interesting. So essentially there will be people that might not be data scientists, but they are the ones that know which questions to ask.
We need both. Because at the moment, there's a lot of people who know what questions to ask. They just have masses and masses of data that's not really well structured. And you essentially can't very easily go through it and process it. And on the other hand, you have people who have lots of structured data, but too many questions without prioritization.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take more time for something useful to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did electrical engineering.
Yes, that's right.
I also did electrical engineering from my undergrad. So
yeah.
that means there's a room right now of 2 electrical engineers. I'm a big fan of the subject. I'm sure you are as well.
Yes.
If anything, you're far more of a fan for the subject, going to the PhD level in electrical engineering. What are your thoughts? What is it that attracted you to do electrical engineering?
It's funny because before choosing to do electronic engineering, there were 2 aspects. One, when I was about 12, I wanted to do architecture because I really liked the idea of building something that people can use. But then I realized that you make a design, it gets built, and then it remains the same forever. People can't interact with it.
Was that too boring for you?
Well, I just wanted to do something that would be more helpful than a static solution. And so, I just started thinking about engineering and so on. And then at one point, my sister was doing medicine, and I thought, oh, that's super exciting, learn how the body works and so on. Started trying to reverse engineer biology. How nice is that? But then a very, very good family friend who's a professor in Spain, Victor de Lorenzo, he asked me, like, yeah, dude, but if you do medicine, wouldn't you miss the physics? And at that point, my head just went bing, because I realized the physics, the maths, all of that, I wouldn't get to touch for years.
Sorry, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
I like this. So he answered that question with a question.
Yes. Which is similar to what I was...
Yeah, that's what I mean. And clearly that made you make your own conclusions.
Yeah.
That just, again, I'm just saying that to verify what you said earlier, which is the best advice you can get is one that's actually a question in return.
Yeah. Well, it's very funny, actually. I have him in very high regard. And one thing that he used to say to his PhD students, when they would come to him with a question, sometimes he had the answer, but he would just look at them and be like, he'd tap his head and be like, think. Like, if I wasn't here, what would you do?
Yeah.
And that really forces people to first try by themselves and also sort of flex their muscles in the decision making and figure out what's important in decision making. Because a lot of the time, you have loads of information, but not all of it is relevant.
That sounds to me like you've just knocked on the door of the topic of education, which is very dear to my heart.
Yeah, okay.
So there's 2 types of learning across the world. Mm-hmm. The one type of learning in certain countries, it's about, here's a textbook, now learn everything inside it.
Yeah.
Now come to the exam, regurgitate the information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well done, you've passed with 95%.
Yeah.
You're smart and intelligent.
Well, that just means you're knowledgeable.
Okay.
Doesn't mean the same. So in my book, smart means that you can take good decisions, whatever that is. Intelligent means that you have the capacity to make good decisions. But if you're intelligent and lazy, you just don't do anything. And if you're knowledgeable, it just means that you know a lot of facts. Now, you could also be knowledgeable and have been misled, where, some people feel like they know a lot, but then they've just been getting the wrong information. That's another subset. But what I believe is important right now, particularly like we were discussing earlier, where information is really easily accessible, is that it's a lot more valuable to be smart so that you can make the right decisions, intelligent so you have the capacity to make decisions, but you can also compensate that with effort. So you might not be the most intelligent person in the room, but if you put your mind to it and put in some time, you can get just as good a result. And knowledgeable now is just not as valuable because it's just
it's not novel anymore.
It's not exactly. It's not a differentiating factor. It's a level. It's been a level playing field. And there's one other parameter which is wise, and that comes with experience.
Okay.
So imagine that I came to you for advice.
Yep.
and I ask you about a topic, you could choose to help me with the topic, or you could just say, hang on, is that the most important thing you should be worrying about right now? Because you feel or you know that something else should be the priority rather than the topic that I've brought up. And that touches on the topic of relevance, because in order to be useful, you also need to be relevant. And so that's one of the things that I believe it'd be very good for universities to include in the curriculum. It's already in a lot of courses, but it's not really a topic as it used to be. So, for example, there's a lot of people that talk about project management, and that's essentially resource management. You're basically managing the deadlines, the time, cost, and people, resources. Yeah, that's fine, but you can do that with certain rules, and you figure it out, and that's it. But product management, for example, when you need to also work on the fact that in order for a very good, well-intended product to have an impact, people need to use it beyond the first day. So there's this problem within the wearables world where people buy it, they get it as a present, they use it for 2 weeks, and after that, it's in the drawer for life. Imagine that your objective was to improve people's health. You've done all the steps right until the very end, which was
create the product.
Well, you've done the electronics, you've done the software, you've done the UX, UI, you've done the commercials, you've done the distribution, you've done the marketing, but it didn't stick, right? And I'm not saying that we should be focusing all our efforts on making sure it sticks, but we should be mindful that if any of those in the chain fall, the whole thing gets multiplied. It's essentially like a product. A times B times C. It's not because it's A plus B plus C and then I have everything. It's a multiplication. If one of them fails, it's very likely that everything, the result of the multiplication will be 0.
Got it. So just to simplify, so that's like saying, so there's 1 plus 1 plus 1, which is 3.
Yeah.
I'm glad I know that. Or you can have 1 times 0, but the result will be 0 at the end of it. Because no matter how good the first 2 parts are, if the last part doesn't follow suit to the rest of the whole story, then it collapses.
Yes, that's right. So 1 plus 1 plus 0 is 2, right? Which appears to be a good number. But if you have 1 times 1 times 0 is 0.
Yeah.
And it's just to highlight the high stakes of making sure that everything is well thought out all the way backwards. So you know your end goal, and then you know your means goals. And you know which ones are critical, which ones are not.
Okay, Eduardo, I want to take you back to our education conversation.
Sure.
How should schools look like? How should schools teach?
One thing that was tried about a decade ago or so as was the reverse teaching method, where basically you ask people to learn and then they come to class and then try to solve a problem together. That's one way. It normally requires quite a lot of discipline from the students. So there's at the moment that tricky part of making sure people are prepared. Then there's the option of making everything online and people can do it. But these are essentially different means to an end. The goal is for someone to get better at something. And the something will be very different from person to person. So if you were to ask me, how should we teach people to design electronic circuits? I'd say, okay, well, you probably need, before they go into the real world, you need a lab to test with, or you need to send them some kit so they can do it at home, because you need physical practice. Or you could say, well, actually, we'll split it and someone else takes care of that and we just teach them the theory. Or we quiz them, like a bit like Khan Academy, very, very little incremental steps. You quiz them and you sort of get the reassurance that when you teach them a hard module, they already know all the basics because they got there through all the filters. I guess my question to you would be, which aspect of education do you think is broken right now? Is it a case of quality? Is it the quantity? Is it the price? Because different optimization parameters will need different solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you compare China and Finland, so we know that statistically Finland is the leader in terms of education. And
how do you measure that?
Again, this is not my metric, but this is definitely the let's say the commonly accepted metric that Finland is the leader. I think it's in terms of their results
Okay.
when they're 16 years old, I believe.
Yeah.
They
By the way, I
Mhm.
wasn't challenging you.
Oh, no, it's
I was
absolutely
challenging
fine.
the concept of
Absolutely.
the metric. Yeah.
I completely understand. Yeah. I mean, that's another conversation in itself. Metrics. You know, who comes out with metrics? What does being the leader in education mean? What does that mean? You know, is that just a title we attribute to ourselves? But what I was saying was, so Finland, let's assume, is the leader, quote unquote,
Okay.
in the education sphere. Or let's say it's amongst the top. But the way it does things is completely different to how China does things. Yet also Chinese students are also at the top. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So also I'm aware that China, I believe, have the highest number of hours on a week for students compared to, again, I'll go back to Finland. They don't have that many contact hours. They don't wear any uniform for school. If anything, they take their shoes off when they go into the school.
Yeah.
They call their teachers on first name basis.
Yeah.
The school doesn't look like a school. It looks more like a home, a house. It's a comfortable place.
Yeah.
So you've got two entirely different ways of educating, yet the results are more or less the same. Do you then think that schools should be structured in a way so that you are producing a workforce for a certain goal? So you want to see what goal, okay, what kind of workforce do we want for the future? How can we nurture them in a way so that they can meet those demands?
That's what I was going to touch on, because the workforce needs of Finland and China might be very different, and their long-term objectives might be very different. So if you train someone now and they finish A levels, they're going to be contributing to that society for the next 30, 35 years, 40, and you want to have people that are going to both be useful and not need support. Because, for example, in the 80s, there were a lot of people that were being trained for manual work for the auto industry as it was dying. And instead, people needed electronic and software engineers, and there weren't enough of them. So, China, for example, is taking a big push on AI, and it is training a lot of people on that. But that's more at the university level. At the school level, I think that it would depend on the need of the country, but also on the constraints. Because if you have a very large population to provide schooling for, you might need to do it with a mass market mentality, and so it's very different. So I think if you could let's compare education with sports, right? There are many sports, there are many jobs you can have. Each sport is ever so slightly different, so the practice needs to be different. Some of them need a lot of hand-eye coordination, some of them need a lot of strength, some of them need a lot of endurance. So the training is going to be different. The same could be said about schools, and normally this is the case in universities, although a lot of the training is still book-based and lecture-based and so on. So people only really get to do their real customized training when they go to work and learn on the job. Right? Imagine someone finishes their degree and they haven't had any experience in the outside world. All they've done is learning in class.
Yeah, very true.
Essentially. And all of a sudden, they're put in a position where they need to produce, which is fine. It's like an assignment. But then 5 years from then they become the teacher. And there's only a 5-year gap. Some people might not have had enough good examples of how to lead a team. And I sort of digress there, but what I mean to say is that we now have the communication tools to cut out a lot of the middlemen that, to a certain degree, is a bit like Chinese whispers. You add noise into the communication field, and you add delays between the question and the answer. So imagine that, for example, at the moment, books are available, right? You make them all available online. The only barrier to entry or to reading these books is time and effort and interest from the student side. But what if you, for example, had it as a chatbot that all of a sudden says, hey, I found this interesting topic. Did you know about it? And then you say, no. It's like, oh, what? Because this is important, da, 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 da. And you have a conversation in the same way that people used to learn from a teacher or learn from a colleague that knows more. What if, for example, we were having this conversation and I'm learning from you, you learn from me, but one of us was not a person, right? Would you enjoy this more than reading a book? Maybe.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Would you enjoy this more than watching a video, a static video? I mean, the video moves, but the file is the same now and will be tomorrow. And we're not extremely far from that, right? Because in the same way that at the moment you can have interactions via, let's call it Skype or Zoom or whatever, video conference with another person, it wouldn't be unthinkable to say, well, actually the other person or the individual that you're interacting with is not a person, it's just some form of, let's call it program rather than just AI and jump straight in. But you could use that for education. You could use that for advice. You could use that to detect when someone is not in a great mood, and you can help them through stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So in the same way that your iPhone X right now can detect your facial expressions, maybe just keep an eye on things. And if your facial expressions are, negative for a long time, then the machine, in a very personalized, private way, could say, hey, like, are you all right today?
Absolutely. I mean, on that point, a problem that the world will face in 2050, one of the biggest problems is an aging population, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And what the aging population face, which young people don't face as much, is loneliness. It's actually
Absolutely,
really
yes.
sad. And you could imagine that artificial intelligence, so as you said, a program, a machine, a sound bot, chat, messenger, whatever you want to call it, can keep those people company. Have a chat with them, a conversation.
Yeah.
How are you this morning,
Yeah.
James?
Yeah.
You run out of eggs.
Yeah.
Go out and get some eggs.
So the same thing, or even flip it. The young people have a lot of support from these sort of AIs, and then the elderly population gets face-to-face human contact, right? Imagine that you could do everything that you're doing today in 2 hours instead of 8.
That would be amazing.
I'd
have 6 more hours to do what I want to do.
Yes. And if what you want to do happens to be taking care of your parents, then so be it, right? And in essence, this is a little bit tricky because obviously people will say, well, if you can do the same as 8 hours in 2, then you'll just do more, like happened with email.
More productive.
Yeah, you can be even productive. But what I mean to say is that we can apply these type of chatbots interactions directly to the end user, but you could have you could use it in a slightly different way to have a chain reaction, but still ensure that the FaceTime that the elderly population gets is still with people.
Right. Okay.
So it's almost like saying
you don't want the machine to replace humans then in that case.
Well, no, I'm just putting it out there that it could be ever so slightly different. Just because very often people see two things and put 2 and 2 together as the only option. Just because there was no option before and now there is one, it becomes the option. I'm just suggesting that you could have you help someone by helping the person that helps them. So imagine that we help the carers.
Got it.
Then these people can do their job better.
Yeah.
We help the doctors, the nurses. We help the people that do community care.
It's a positive externality. Yeah. As I'm helping someone, they can help others.
That's
and it's
right.
almost like the network effect. Just to, I guess, go off on a tangent a little bit. I was having this conversation a week ago with a friend of mine where he challenged me on this actually, and I never thought of it that way. He said all these new products and services and websites and apps, they're all about saving you time. Oh, Mr. or Mrs. Busy. You're so busy, I'll save you time. But to just take back our example, so you said, what I can do in 8, I can do in 2 hours. But the question is, what do we do with all that time that we quote-unquote save?
So it depends on the person and their judgment. The thing to bear in mind is that a lot of the digital products that are currently being built are for people that are dog fooding. So they want a product because they find their need, is their own need, and they want to fix it for themselves. And normally, people in the tech industry, they tend to keep themselves very busy, and so they always feel like they're lacking time, right? And so essentially, they build these products thinking of themselves. On how people use their time, I'll touch on that in a moment. But it's important to remember that when someone goes through life, there are periods where they're very time rich but money poor, and then periods where they're very money rich but time poor, and then other periods where they're maybe time rich, money okay, or maybe money poor, and health poor. Right? Okay. Let's put it that way. As three aspects that matter. The improvement in time saving could really help, for example, in discharging patients. So at the moment, when a patient needs to go home or needs to go to a community care center, different areas of London have different word forms that the nurse, the physio, or the doctor needs to fill in, copy pasting from one data source to another, and this takes time. It takes sometimes hours of the day that they could be spending with a person, a patient.
Yeah.
So those time savings can still help the elderly population.
That's useful to go back to what you said at the start of the
so
podcast.
essentially, if you think about the tree and all the people that support this elderly person, if elderly people are currently the object, is you have the community care, you have the neighbors, you have this. A lot of the time, the people around them, if they're of a different age, where they're money rich but time poor, then you need to save these people time to be able to make time for the others.
Right.
For this face-to-face that you were referring to as something valuable. And it's true, there's always going to be people that say, oh, well, you just make the time. And that's also why I think that prioritization of tasks is very important, because a lot of the time people end up doing something that is auxiliary, not really helping the end purpose.
Tell us more about that, because I'll just say briefly, what I've been doing recently, only a couple of months now, I've had this problem many times, where there's, say, 7 things I need to do on that day.
Yeah.
But then what tends to happen is you become lazy, or you want to do the more fun tasks, even though in reality, there's no priority. So I started actually numbering them and then just doing them by the highest priority onwards, almost like a computer. But what is your way? I mean, what's your advice?
So I found a really interesting way to convey this from a previous colleague called Joe Tinston, who used to say ice. And at the first meeting I was working with him, I was thinking, what does he mean?
Maybe he was singing ice, ice, baby.
No, he wasn't. He meant impact, confidence, and effort.
Impact, confidence, and effort.
Right?
ICE.
So, for example, you have a set of 10 tasks that you want to do for others or you want to do for yourself. You have you rank the impact, say 1 to 5, 5 being high. You then have confidence, 5 being high and 1 being low, right?
Okay.
And then you have effort being 5 is a lot of effort and E is very easy, right? And then you can rank them by, for example, saying, well, my score points are I times C divided by E. So impact times confidence divided by effort.
Okay.
So if you have 2 tasks with the same amount of effort and same amount of impact, but one has a higher level of confidence, you should do that one first, right? This is one aspect of prioritization that doesn't account time, right? Because there's another aspect, for example, another framework that Randy Pouch used to talk about. Randy Pouch was a computer scientist lecturer at Carnegie Mellon who gave this last lecture. It was very, very good. And he was talking about urgency versus importance. What's
the difference?
So urgency is something that you need to do right now. Like, for example, you might at one point today need to go to the loo.
Okay.
That's urgent, but it might not be important. It's not going to change your life.
No.
Right? So in the same way at work, you might have to do certain things that are urgent, like approve something for someone, but it might not be super important, or that person might be able to do it themselves. And these examples are ever so slightly tricky, but what he used to say was, let's rank, for example, importance in letters, so A, B, C, and urgency in numbers, 1, 2, 3. So if you have something that's both important and urgent, it's A1.
Okay.
If it's something important but not urgent, then it's A3. Now, what he said is that most people will look at this and say, okay, well, you start with A1, then you go to B1, which is essentially less important but still urgent. It's like a burning task that people are pressurizing you to do.
Okay.
So that's okay, but it's not the best way. The best way would be to say, let's focus on everything that's important and longer term is going to have a very positive impact in your life or the life of others. And then tackle the urgent ones in a decreasing order of importance,
Okay.
so that you also convey the message that actually you're asking something of me that you could do yourself or you could delegate to someone else, and make sure that you don't work on not so useful aspects.
Okay, Eduardo, so what you've mentioned to me now sounds to me like the modern day toolkit to prioritize your tasks. And again, these are just some out of many. How did people like Da Vinci or Aristotle, who were polymaths, who did almost everything from art to science, physics, chemistry, acting, philosophy. How did they do it? Did they use these frameworks?
For a lot of people, this becomes very intuitive. I have worked with people that are very good at prioritizing their tasks, but they're not very good at conveying why. So they'll know what they need to do because in their head the model of success is very clear. They know that in order to be successful or achieve what they want to achieve quickly, they need to do it this way, like a path. And it's almost like riding a bike. Once you know how to ride a bike, it's very difficult to explain it to someone. And often people have learned from others. And also some people observe others a lot more intently than most people do.
And is that a useful skill?
I think it is, particularly when you can discern what's useful to you and what isn't. So I'm not suggesting that people go and mimic others, but it's important to observe others and listen to others, particularly when they're talking about their mistakes or failures, because that will give you some understanding, if the rules of the games don't change, as to what to prevent and avoid.
Okay. Yeah.
Because otherwise you'll make the same mistakes. And that's one of the problems with society is that, I'm sure you've heard this before, but people don't learn from history because they don't read history. Well, yes, you could read it, but the thing is that a lot of people really want to learn things by themselves, as if it's a more authentic experience. Yeah, that's true, but there's certain aspects of life that are too risky to learn by yourself.
Yeah,
they're too costly, right?
Yeah.
Going back to prioritization and Da Vinci, like you mentioned, I presume, and I can only assume, that they were probably people that were very thoughtful, were very clear as to what they wanted, and were observed a lot. If you look at the Da Vinci drawings of humans and so on, there's a lot of detail into that.
Yeah.
And there's one final aspect which is very interesting, and I'm sure that if you pay attention to other people and how they learned, is that some people learn with things as a black box, right? You have a computer, it does what you need it to do, and you move on. Some other people want to learn from first principles. They want to know how it works inside and how the thing that works inside, how it works at a physical level. And what that helps is that it helps you know how everything works within it. You then learn the first principles, which then allows you to apply part of those first principles to another problem in the future. Whereas if you just learn as a black box, you're like, oh, I wish I had a similar black box that solves this new problem. Whereas someone that knows the first principles can say, well, actually, it's just the same thing as the fundamentals of that. So yeah, let's do it. We can do that in an afternoon.
Yeah. The thing with learning from others' mistakes compared to your mistakes is that the mistakes that you make have much more of an impact on yourself, and they're much more memorable. Yeah. Whereas if you read in a book that somebody 200 years ago offended his wife by making this comment, it's not going to have the same impact. Whereas if you've experienced it firsthand, right?
Yeah, there's also another aspect to mention, is that I was referring to learning things that are either never going to change, like the laws of physics, or changing very slowly, like business and technology. If you, on the other, and these are, you can, at any point in time, you can consider them deterministic. So if you throw something in the air today, it'll fall down. Same thing tomorrow, and tomorrow. You know what to expect. Whereas people are not so deterministic. You could think of it as a person is like a black box, and you have various things. You can have whatever state of mind they're in, as well as whatever noise there might be internally, right? And by noise, I mean like the static that you might pick up on a microphone is the same thing with the human brain cells. So it's a lot harder to model, right? And so learning human behavior is more of let's find an approach that catches everything and minimizes risk. Whereas maybe when you're designing a rocket, you're optimizing one parameter, right? And so one is focused and excludes everything else, whereas the other one is inclusive. You include all the inputs and you basically minimize and try to find a ring fence that works.
Okay. And
so engineering very often is like this, but then product management is like the other one, where you try and make sure it works for everyone. So one example is in the movie, I've forgotten the name now, I'll remember later.
It's not Ex Machina, is it?
No, it's about product design. It's not Helvetica, it's the other one. But essentially, they have an interview with a designer team, and they say, well, very often our clients will come and say, our average user is a 48-year-old lady that weighs 100 and something pounds.
So that's like the persona of the
Yes,
customer.
but then they listen very gently and say, okay, well, thank you very much. But what we're interested in is the old granny who's very frail and the bodybuilder who can't like put his arms closer than X, so that we build a product that caters to everyone.
So the extremes as well, the extreme
Exactly.
user.
Yeah. So the edges inform the mean, but the mean doesn't inform the edges.
Interesting. Okay, before we wrap up, you went from engineering to now pursuing an MBA.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your thought process here, or your decision making for this particular decision.
So there's various aspects. Like I said before, there's this chain when you want to be successful at something, when you want to put a product in the market that does the job you would like to do yourself, but in masses, many people at the same time. So you can essentially multiply yourself by just putting some knowledge or rules into systems. You then need to make it available, right? And then the last stage, so the last mile of innovation is business. You need to make sure it's viable. You need to make sure it's there. You need to make sure the team works well together and so on. So I want to essentially have the end-to-end knowledge to be able to say, well, I can listen to someone because I'm a person, and I can identify needs. I can engineer the solution, and then I want to be able to deliver it, and not just deliver it once, but deliver it in a way that's viable for the longer term. So I can then move on to something else, and that continues to run by itself. I had done quite a bit of that before, but what I wanted to do with the MBA was essentially cover all of it to ensure that I was exposed to my what do you call it when you drive?
When you drive.
The blind spot. Yes.
Ah, okay.
So I wanted to be exposed to all my blind spots and learn about that so that I would then have more confidence, consolidate my knowledge in the business aspect.
Yeah.
So I would then have more confidence and
That's
security.
a phenomenal way of putting it, to be honest. I might steal that from you. So I'll be playing this back and mentioning this in whatever future interviews I might encounter.
Yeah.
But it is great, consolidating. But isn't part of this humility? Because you had to acknowledge that there might be some blind spots in your experience.
Yeah.
You're doing engineering, and you did take it to the PhD level.
Yeah.
But you acknowledged that actually maybe you're not as versed in the business world as could be. And the MBA plans to plug some of those holes in, or at least formally, on a formal sense.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, in the world we live in today, we like titles, right? I mean, you could be the best businessman in the world, but as soon as you say, oh, I did this at that institution, people just generally say, oh, okay.
You'd be surprised. People who really know how hard it is to do something well will ask you, what can you do? Not who you are or what have you done. And what that means is, today, when we work together for the hours we're together, what can you do so that we together get to where we want to?
So it's about the present moment.
It's about the upcoming contributions. And so this is it comes this is borrowed, by the way. It comes from this Randy Pauw's lecture that I discovered many years ago. It's when he went to Disney and he wanted to do all this VR experience and so on. There was a lady there that just said, "What can you do?" It's like, "Oh, I have a PhD." And said, no, that's what you've done. What can you do? It's like, well, I can program things. Okay, fine. Let's just move on from that.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I'm touching on the MBA is because to do something successfully, if you want to put it in the market and you want it to be viable and to continue to be a sustained success, you need to have the knowledge to make the right decisions when you have uncertainty, missing information, and you could lean on a friend or someone that you consider your colleague, but this person might not be there, this person might be busy, and so the more independent you can be, the less communication delay there is, the less communication uncertainty there is, in that what you say might be interpreted in a slightly different way. And so I thought that having all the tools that I need to go end to end will be very, very good.
Eduardo Aguilar, That was a phenomenally interesting conversation. I would have loved it to continue, forever, really. But, we already did go over time. But
Oh,
I think
really?
it hit a point, half an hour, 40 minutes, and I was like, you know what? This is going to keep going.
Okay.
You know, if anyone's made it through 20, 30 minutes, they'll probably continue after
Yeah.
that anyway. So thanks a lot for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
How can people get in touch with you if they want to?
So find me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
That's
okay.
probably the easiest way, yeah.
Perfect. And you've got a TED Talk available on YouTube
Yes.
for those listening and wanting to watch your TED Talk. And you've also got a few other videos.
There's a few on YouTube.
You spoke elsewhere.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely great. Thanks everybody for listening or watching. This was an episode of the Business Podcast where we went above and beyond business. We spoke about education, it was quite philosophical, the ethics, AI, machine learning, data analytics. It's a really interesting conversation.
Well, thank you. It was for me as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, everyone listening, make sure you're subscribed. If you're not already, you can listen to this podcast on iTunes. It's just the Business Podcast at Imperial. And the main website is businesspodcast.co. That's businesspodcast.co. Make sure you subscribe, tune in, and leave a comment and a review. Thanks a lot. I was your host, Amin Siala. Bye-bye.